Hey everyone, it's Joe Glines here in Dallas, Texas.
And Jackie here from Copenhagen, Denmark.
And we're I don't even know what week number we're into the pandemic, but we're all staying alive, I guess, huh?
Yeah, staying safe.
Yeah.
Staying alive. Yeah.
So I was telling Jackie I was watching this video on Power Automate, which is a Microsoft product for doing automation type things. Let me share my screen here and get this one. And it part of it, which we're not going to get into this video, but at some point we want to talk about Power Automate. It had some cool stuff with some AI interfacing, which was great. But the beginning workflow, which I was watching this video, and it was basically, had these things where you go in and it's all drag and drop, select from this menu, and then you select this. And I'm watching the video, and it just is really, really annoying me at everything these days, especially with, there was Blue Prism, Automate Anywhere, and what was the third one you mentioned?
UiPath?
Yeah, UiPath, right. I mean, all of the leading ones out there are GUI-based things that you have drag and drop. And I know from talking to Tank, because he's used them, is that it lowers the bar, right? So more people can use them, but to get even simple stuff done, it adds 20 more steps you got to do, because not every window is going to be a binary decision, but it really comes closer to that, right? Like you have to break down things very minute to have a GUI to simplify what you're doing.
Yeah, and in most cases, these drag and drop stuff, it of course, it as you said, lowers the bar, but the chance of it really fitting in enough cases where
yes, it very limits you. Yes.
Yeah, and they're getting better, but still, if you don't have something to drag that really fits every situation, it's hard to sometimes work with these drag and drop systems.
Yeah, and that's another one of why when I find, especially I find a new tool out there that does something cool, and I'm like, you know what, I like that, but hey, I can actually do that in AutoHotkey, and I can write a script that does it. And I like that because, again, in AutoHotkey, I can tweak it to almost any way I want it and adjust it and interact with it any way I want, versus in that given tool, some programmer has designed it to work a certain way, and it's extremely limiting, right? Or it usually is. It's very limiting on what you can do. So I think that is a really good point. But we were also discussing a bit of how, one is they're lowering the bar, and I think companies in general, they get really excited at the concept of, ooh, I can have something where the people I have employed can automate this system for me and do RPA type level work, which sadly, from talking to Tank also, like that rarely is the case, right? Like you don't end up having an employee there writing new stuff. They might do some maintenance, but they're not usually building their own bots right from scratch, is what it sounds like.
And I know from my own company where they've opted to have another company actually make these bots. They of course buy the licenses. They use our own employees to get the ideas of what needs to be automated, and then they validate that it's a task that makes sense to automate, and then they document the task and then send it to another company to then program or drag and drop the bot, and then they get something finalized back. And one of the arguments for that is then we don't need to have that expertise in-house, and we can always point at them if stuff is not working and so on and so forth. But again, they're making something complex, something the company is dependent on, and then they're handing it off to another company, which at least in my company's case is kind of a weird way of doing it, because we're an essential part of our own country's infrastructure, which is like, okay, so if stuff doesn't work, maybe people won't get order. Maybe they'll freeze in the winter, or maybe they don't have gas for their stoves, or again, it goes on and goes on, and we even have electron. No, doesn't matter. It's just the idea of being dependent on another company in that way, and
external company. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and of course we have it with other situations.
Sure. And let's get back to, if it was in-house, probably not everybody on the team would know how to do it. And so you'd still be reliant on the one person on your team, right, to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But that was one also, is like when that person on, because you and actually we had a side conversation where you were describing something. Was it a work order? I forget what it was, but
yeah.
But it was because when you were explaining your process of what you were helping them think through, it's very clear you have thought out that process from a programming perspective, right? Of understanding what you need to know and the logic that goes in there. And that's something that honestly gets back to the programmer needs to have a total, full, deep understanding of the actual process that happens, right? And then again, man, when you can actually have that in-house, it's so much easier to catch things that you never would have realized, because if they don't ask the right questions, holy cow, right? It becomes problematic, or things break.
Yeah, and I've used tools like Automate and a few of the others, and other macro tools for that matter, whatever you want to call them. And sometimes the company that makes them, or whoever wrote them, thinks, oh, if I have something, let's say it's an if, or it's a yes and no, or whatever, and I wanted to go to whatever graphical side and have UI elements that you can see. Oh, but then it was a no, or false or true, whatever. And then it goes off to whatever that was. When you come back to that later to figure out what the statement that is being evaluated to find out, oh, then you need to right click the element, and then in the metadata you can actually read what the statement was. Okay, but this time the statement was actually one of the more involved ones, so you need to actually click in to get the advanced view of the statement, which is then in another window, which is then below, and then you have something that might look like red X to actually do it. And so even by simplifying all of these different types of things, you still need to add complexity into a lot of the different parts. And by hiding it more and more, because, oh, on the surface, it needs to be really simple, needs to be very easy to just make these very, very simple flows. But in many, many cases, you need to do something that's just a little tad advanced here and there. And with code like AutoHotkey code or other types of written code, most of the time you can simply read it. You can see the parameter. You can see the variable. You can see how many things have passed. You can see why it's deciding to do it. And with someone who is taught or educated in reading it or has experience reading it, they can read it pretty quickly. And because it's not hidden behind anything. And of course, when it becomes even more complex and things are dynamic calls back and forth and all over the place, it becomes hard to just read it out. But still, getting to that level with the drag and drop stuff seems almost impossible currently. So
yeah, I think it's an important thing to point out, which is what you're getting to, is no matter what, the people either that are doing the work or programming it, or but even then it's more often the actual workers have to explain it to the programmers, the logic behind what you're doing, right? And that honestly, which we were discussing, and I we talked about I forget how you said it, but you and I are both on the same page of like the average person in a corporate office that uses a computer just doesn't know how to use a computer, right? I mean, like they're so poor on how efficient they are at using a computer. I'm not knocking people; no one trains them, right? So look,
Yeah.
I'm not blaming them, but I blame businesses for not encouraging it. First off, but I don't know if it's even the quote unquote programming side of thing. It's like basic logic of understanding if I need an if here or an and or an or clause, or if I need to group these kind of thing like that. That seems like it's a lost art nowadays, and people don't understand. When you start it, did you know the whole story of Socrates, right? And how he got in trouble, where he kept asking people questions, and they're like, well, why do you do that? Well, I do that because of this. Well, why do you do that? And basically people got frustrated because they realized someone just told them to do that. They don't know why, right? Someone told me I do this and that's all I know. And it caused a lot of uncertainty and people, not happy with it. But yeah, I kind of feel there's a big lack in today's environment of the workforce of people really knowing why they do things, and can explain it, and with the way you were explaining it to me on your example, right? Because there was a clear logic on why you do different things. Oh, no, that changes. It's always this. Well, it depends on this, right? And you already knew that. You didn't have to think about it for a while, which still would have been fine if you're working through it the first time. But.
Yeah, sure. And it's one of the things that I kind of rambled into when we talked before this was this thing with stuff becoming more and more simple on the surface, but that middle layer where you have someone who's really, really good and proficient at programming and able to make it into a graphical thing that you can drag and drop, and it's really, really nice. But the end user, the one that's supposed to use it, I know Tank has said it before, that they need to learn these drag and drop systems, because even those systems have weird quirks compared to whatever. So for the most part, you might not be saving as much time. And because you then have this obscurification of what's behind what a different decision in the program or whatever you would call it, it can become, at least to me, without knowing everything, it seems to be really hard to debug. And if the people making it are that much further away from even understanding the code behind the GUI, then the people explaining it to the people who are supposed to fix it will have an even harder time of doing it, because that's something that both you and me have had with AutoHotkey.
Right.
Someone trying to explain what they're trying to do, or what's not working, or what kind of issue they're experiencing. And sometimes it turns out that it's very, very simple, and sometimes they're talking about something that does not make any sense to you until you work at the problem and they get either the command or function name correct, or whatever it is that kind of fixes you for it. But if everybody on the user end are so removed from the programming logic, to me, it becomes like a sad step away from really understanding what the computer is doing.
Right.
Which might just be because I kind of grew up with computers and seeing it evolve. And I wasn't really a first mover. I'm not old enough to be that, but still in some place in the 90s, I started using a computer and moved from there. And a lot of that was DOS and the first few Windows systems and stuff like that. And I've probably never really been an expert, but I'm pretty good at using a computer, basic type stuff. And now I'm seeing colleagues who's been both working with computers as long as me, but they've just been in one word editor or sending emails, or people much younger than me who've kind of grown up with computers being a part of their everyday lives, and they've had their entire school time with computers and their education with computers and everything they've done on computers. But still, when a Windows message pops up, they either click it without reading it, or they don't touch it because there's some text there, but I didn't read it, but it's probably dangerous. So what do I do with this box? And I'm like,
Read
fair
it.
enough.
Yeah.
But if
Read
you
it and
actually
Google it. Yeah.
yeah, that's the most simple answer, right? It's like, but it's saying there's an error code 265,305A. Google it. Try that. And if it says your computer will crash and burn if you then don't click OK. Try and do something else. But most of the time, it's okay to just move on. But it's simple support. I understand why not everybody really gets stuff like that. But yeah, it's just, to me, it's like when I started, it was kind of a thing where computers was a part of my education and part of my day-to-day office life and when I'm seeing similar people in similar jobs or whatever you call that, not understanding the computer more than turning it on and starting a program, right?
So let's I don't know how in the world we're going to title this topic, by the way, our actual podcast. But anyway, where I wanted to go next with this conversation, because it's still related to this, we talked about this. Should we, the AutoHotkey community enthusiasts, should we just I'll kind of say throw up our hands and say, you know what, people want a GUI. So as much as I hate saying it, should we use like the macro pullovers, macro recorder type thing and push that or something like it to people? Should we create something so people start actually adopting AutoHotkey? Because I don't like the whole, which I've already said, I hate the whole using a GUI for doing it. But I'm a firm believer, once you do that and you start looking at the AutoHotkey code, you're like, hey, you know what? This is readable. Right? I can make sense of it. And maybe that's the in, because right now, no one's looking at AutoHotkey in the business world. Very few are, right? And they're looking at these ridiculously expensive other systems like Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism and stuff that cost tens of thousands or $100,000 to implement, when there are other tools they could be using. Yet, again, I think sometimes it's something with the memory and vulnerability. In some small instances, people are concerned with some sort of security issues, right? I think that does come up, but on average, that's probably not the main reason why they're looking at those other tools.
Yeah, and that's some of the things that we have talked about many times over is where do we see AutoHotkey moving, and in essence, much of that relies on where is Windows moving, and Microsoft has quite a few things they're doing, and AutoHotkey has a lot of volunteers, but I'm not sure we don't seem to have these same. I'm not sure what to call it, because I don't actually want to put people down that are using quite a lot of time on AutoHotkey, and I really, really do appreciate those people doing that. But when looking at other forums or other languages, sometimes they just turn out some amazing stuff where I'm like, oh, they're really pushing the boundaries of what can be done here.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are converted into AutoHotkey a year or two later, if someone comes along who understands it. And that's great. But what if Microsoft in 2 years actually decided to change the inner workings of how Windows works? Or if everything moves into native apps or whatever it might be, because already with Windows 10, we've seen quite a few changes, and that's happened all the time. But at some point, everybody will be in the office place will be used to drag and drop.
Yeah.
And let's say in 4 years, 5 years, whatever. And we still want AutoHotkey to be relevant, and trying to move into a GUI interface might not be the correct thing to do with AutoHotkey, but will it ever move from just being something that a lonely worker uses to help him automate his tasks? I'm not sure we can really move over that bar. We can strive to do it, but I'm unsure if AutoHotkey can really move outside of that frame.
Yeah, and given the whole coronavirus thing right now and people working from home, I got to think in the future, in the next couple of years, we're going to see more people working remotely than in a given office, right? Which means, to me, odds are more type of remote desktop type of situations, or like an Office 365 or some tool where it's not running locally on my desktop. So it does slowly start shifting away from some of the stuff that we can really excel in really well with AutoHotkey.
Yeah, and that's we've had some really good years. I'm not saying that we're going away anytime soon, but in general, with stuff moving into the cloud and changing away from the original being hard-coded for Windows, where more and more companies are trying to make it device independent. Is that a correct term? Where it doesn't really matter which device you're on. Right. You can still use Word, or you can still use Zoom, or you can still use Teams, or whatever it might be, and everything not everything, but most of the stuff. And recently I've even seen, what was it? NVIDIA trying to do some game streaming through the cloud or whatever it was. If you had a good enough internet connection, you didn't actually need any type of graphical power on your own. You will just, there's probably some latency issues with, if you want to be competitive in a shoot 'em up or whatever, there's probably some ping issues there, but who knows what it might be. But just a general idea of maybe even moving the entire system out of the hands of the user. And
really interesting.
In a company setting, this might be an even bigger thing. If you as a company can own the hard drive, so to speak, to really the nitty gritty of it, and the only thing that you're giving users is like what you see in Citrix. It's just an image.
Right. Well, what were they 20, 25 years ago? It was, you didn't have hard drives. You just had a screen and a keyboard. What they were, I can't remember what they were called though. There was a certain term for that. But you just, and basically, like my mentor said, this is back when I was 86. No, that was high school. Sorry. 96. I was at college, and he was saying they used to have, oh man, I can't, what they were called, but users got pissed off because basically the IT people wouldn't allow me, I'm trying to do something, they wouldn't allow it for something. And that was why he thought desktop computers really took off, because IT had really locked down what you could and couldn't do. And so people are like, I'm going to get my own damn computer and run it here, and I can do what I want, right? Terminals. That's what
terminals.
Yeah, they would have a terminal. But maybe in some ways, I think you're right? That's almost what you described. Was it's back to where you have like almost even like a tablet too, right? But you have some sort of a display, and you're doing some work, but nothing is really being done on your system. Maybe you save the little files, but there's the CPU processing thing. That's a really interesting.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, let's say, maybe Apple phones have become better, but at some point, maybe a few years ago, it's really hard to save anything on your actual Apple device. There, you probably weren't doing much that made you need to save something on it. Images, videos, sure, and most likely your messages and stuff were also stored on it somewhere. But you couldn't just go to the internet somewhere and download a file. It was just not possible.
Right.
It wasn't a thing you could do because you didn't actually have access to the hard drive in that way on your phone. And I think that users are becoming accustomed to not having the need or whatever. And I saw it with my wife and her iPad when she started school, and we're writing papers on that. And it kept pushing her to save it in OneDrive or in iCloud or whatever it was. And fair enough, but it actually made it more complex for her to use it just because she needed to do it that way. And it's like, yeah, most people can kind of relate to it being stored somewhere on your system, but it being in the cloud, it's nice that you can access it from anywhere. But again, it's still a bit of complexity.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we did quite a while on this.
Sure.
It was interesting, but it'll be very interesting to see where we go in the next couple of years here. I think we might have, because of the coronavirus kind of shifting things and how businesses are doing stuff, we might see a bigger shift to people, having these type of terminal things at home and having less things being actually operated on. It does open up doors though, because hopefully it might get more consistent, because if you have stuff in the cloud more, there's less differences on system by system, right? So it's easier to automate because there's just more similar ways that things are done.
I'd say my company alone, we had a lot of different ways to access our files and drives and stuff like that. But when having hardware with me, it's of course nice that it had the Office Pack installed. But now I can just access Microsoft 365 and still have the Office Pack. And I don't even need to have hardware with me. It makes sense to have company hardware perhaps, but in general, I don't need to actually pick up my laptop and take it from work to my home. I can just use my home computer if, let's say, that was allowed, but it is possible because I can actually log into 365 and SharePoint and whatever. So having stuff in the cloud, of course, makes other things simpler, but
when I worked at TI, I had a work computer. I had 2 work computers, and then I think I had 4 home computers. But I configured Windows to have my desktop and all of my files all under Dropbox, and they were all, every desktop I'd save it on one and with the same on the other one, right? So everything for me, I could go to any computer, and as long as, to your point, I had to have the same programs installed. But all my files were there, and it was amazing how easy it was for me to work on something at work, save it the desktop, go home. It's on my desktop, right? It was like really nice that I could do stuff like that. But anyway. Awesome, man. It was good chatting to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe.